The Sherlock Holmes Advent Calendar. An Odyssey to Jerusalem. By Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. Narrated by Bryan Godwin. Part 19. David versus Goliath. After a restful sleep, waking up early the next morning, we felt that the atmosphere of the city had changed. Salah had asked us to accompany him on the flat roof of his house. What we could observe from there was deeply concerning. The military had moved into the city. Ottoman soldiers patrolled the streets in regular squads of 6. All strategically important places were occupied by guards. The gates of the old city were closed. No one should leave or enter Jerusalem. Administrative officials publicly announced a current decree of the Sanjak administration in the markets and struck it in writing on the doors of the administrative buildings. The army would ensure security in the city and restore peace, according to the official version. "This is a veritable state of siege," said Salah furiously as we stood at the railing of the roof terrace and followed the events. "No," Holmes disagreed. "It's an occupation. It is assumed that the terrorists are now trapped. A curfew will be imposed, and the entire city, house by house, will be searched for suspects. Apparently, the Ottomans now want to take drastic measures and put an end to these games." "Say, Holmes," I asked, "that's not your doing, is it? Did you invite the incumbent Mutasarrif to take these measures last night?" Holmes shook his hands in a defensive gesture. "But no, Watson," he replied, trying to sound and look innocent. "You are obviously overestimating my influence. Besides, I would not resort to such a reckless approach. You know me." "True," I replied and continued. "I know you, and the whole thing smells fishy, like a Holmes maneuver that had gone too far. What are you up to? I thought you just wanted to visit the mosque with the Mutasarrif." "The prayer in the Al-Aqsa Mosque will also take place," Holmes insisted. "Everything else, however, is out of my hands." With these words, he looked demonstratively upwards. I shook my head in disbelief and leaned over the balustrades again, where Salah had been watching the hustle and bustle on the street the whole time, somewhat stunned. He had not participated in our conversation, apparently not even as a passive listener. He seemed a little absent-minded. The next moment, we saw a whole cohort of Ottoman infantry marching through the streets in front of Salah's house. As it came closer, it would soon pass right under our view, and our Palestinian colleague bent far over the parapet by leaning on the limiting roof tiles. "Watch out," said Holmes. "Otherwise you'll end up like Judah Ben-Hur." Salah turned around and asked, "Judah Ben-Hur? Who is that?" "A respected Jewish citizen of Jerusalem," Holmes replied. This claim did not impress Salah at all. "He can't be that respected because I never heard of him. You know him?" "Not personally," Holmes said a little mischievously. "His story goes far back around the time of Jesus Christ." "Then he has been dead for a long time," the Palestinian noted. "Actually, he never lived," Holmes said. When Salah looked even more confused, I finally added, "Ben-Hur is a novel character, the protagonist of a story by the American writer Lew Wallace." "I know him very well," shouted Salah. "Wallace is the former United States ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. He visited Jerusalem several times during his term of office. I didn't know that he was writing books too." "He does," I continued, "and quite successfully. His novel about the fictional character Ben-Hur is one of the most widely read books of our time in North America and Europe. With its Christian message, the story is probably a little less appealing to the Muslims." "You are right about that," Salah said. "So, do tell. What happened to Ben-Hur? Did he fall from the roof of his house?" Holmes laughed. "Not that," he began, but the situation was still similar. When Valerius Gratus, the direct predecessor of a certain Pontius Pilate, took office as Roman prefect in Jerusalem, he staged a triumphal procession through the streets of the city. The inhabitants watched the pompous events from their rooftops, including the family of Ben-Hur. As Valerius was passing through his house, a stone accidentally detached from the terrace wall and fell exactly on the passing Romans. They regarded the incident as an assassination attempt on the prefect. Ben-Hur was arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment in a slave galley. "I understand," Salah said. "Don't worry, Mr. Holmes. I promise not to throw roof tiles at the Ottomans. What else did Fortuna have in mind for the unlucky Ben-Hur? He was released because of beneficial circumstances, Holmes continued. After his return to Jerusalem, he wanted to take revenge on the Romans, who had disenfranchised his family and confiscated his assets. He gained popularity among the Jewish populations because he embodied their hope of resisting Roman oppression. Eventually, Ben-Hur decided to prepare and lead the armed uprising against the occupiers. Salah thought for a moment and said, "Well, if it's a historically accurate novel, then this enterprise has failed." "It didn't take place at all," Holmes replied. "At the last moment, Ben-Hur reflects. Under the influence of the preaching of Jesus of Nazareth and his crucifixion, he becomes a follower of the new doctrine. He blows off the rebellion and turns toward a more peaceful path in the sense of early Christianity." "Of course," commented our Palestinian colleague, "he capitulates and confesses to Jesus. For the most pious among Christians, this is always the best solution. Turn the other cheek, right? Nevertheless, certainly an instructive and interesting story. However, I fear that today's zealots will not be aware of it, and if they were, they will not be impressed. Soon they will act under the rule of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, a life for a lifetime. Unfortunately, this uprising will not be cancelled, not for religious reasons, and not in view of the Ottoman military power. Quite the opposite." Salah was proven right in this assessment. On the surrounding roofs of the other houses of the street, many residents had gathered in the meantime too. They left no doubt that they disapproved of the deployment of Ottoman soldiers. They treated the passers-by with disorderly insults and accusations. But soon they would all chant the same Arabic slogan, and it would echo from the rooftops again and again by hundreds of people as if they shouted with one voice. "What are the people chanting?" I asked. Salah translated for us. "They are shouting, 'Long live the Zealotic Popular Front, Ottomans out.'" I turned to Holmes and gave him a reproachful look. "Good job, Holmes. Congratulations." But my friend stuck to what he had said. "I have nothing to do with that, Watson. I swear it to God." "Don't sin, my old friend," I replied. "Human lives are at stake here." "I am well aware of that," Holmes noted, "and that's why I'm pursuing a completely different plan to prevent worse. Give me some more time." "I'm not sure we have much time left," Salah interjected, pointing to the southern end of the road. A larger group of young people, some looking like children, had gathered there and faced the oncoming Ottoman cohorts. Obviously, Muslims, Jews, and Christians had joined forces for this. "What are the boys up to?" I asked. "Something stupid," Holmes replied, and was to be proven right. In the next moment, the youths swung slingshots and made stones rain on the Ottoman soldiers. The preceding officer brought his squad to a halt briefly. Then he pulled out his saber and gave the command to attack. The Turks stormed off and would reach the youthful stone throwers within seconds, which inevitably had to end in an unequal fight, presumably in a massacre. Some of the boys quickly recognized the dangerous situation, ran away and disappeared into the side streets. Others, however, continued to handle their slingshots undaunted. "For heaven's sake," I shouted, "the soldiers will slaughter them." But luckily it didn't get that far, because now the people reacted on the roofs of houses. All sorts of objects, vases and pots, bricks and wooden boards, and even a few chairs were thrown onto the street. The Ottomans had to retreat and took a stand at a distance, while the inhabitants cheered on the roof terraces. The joy of the people increased when the Turkish officer apparently made a reasonable decision and ordered his cohort to turn back and leave the road in the direction from which it had come. While the young people on the street and the people on the rooftops celebrated their victory, I was relieved, but far less euphoric. "Next time, the soldiers will not be driven away so easily," I predicted thoughtfully. "They will break open doors, drag people out of their homes, and arrest those responsible. This is not a victory, but the prelude to a greater defeat. This time, David will lose to Goliath." "I am still an official of the Ottoman administration," Salah said. "I will go down and check things out, because one of my tasks is to maintain order. Then I will go to the central administration. We'll see what orders are in place for me." With these words, the dutiful Palestinian left us. Holmes and I were left alone on the roof terrace. I looked at Holmes a little perplexed and said, "What are we going to do now?" My friend didn't have to think for a single second. "There is a plan to execute," he explained. "And immediately, I think." Where are we going? I asked. I have to go to the market, and then towards the Temple Mount, Holmes replied. However, you need to stay here, Watson, for safety reasons. For safety? I repeated, insulted. Holmes, listen. I think I can take care of myself and make decisions. I take responsibility for my safety. You misunderstand me, my dear Watson, Holmes replied. It's about my safety, not yours. I need you as a backing in case something goes wrong. Not directly on site, but here as an available reserve, which can be moved up if necessary. If you don't hear from me today, you know what to do. Of course, I replied without thinking, only to have to correct myself immediately. I mean, what do you want me to do then? Holmes looked me in the eye with a serious face and whispered insistently, You must promise me that you will leave Palestine immediately and never come back. I was totally baffled. My mouth was open, unable to form or speak any words. I stared at my friend stunned. He asked me to give up and leave everyone behind in case of failure. It took a few seconds for Holmes to continue in the face of my sudden speechlessness. Shut your mouth, Watson. That was just a joke. If you don't hear from me until the evening, then if I may ask, you will of course go out and look for me, and ideally also find me and save me from my probable predicament. Of course, I quickly confirmed, adding after a short breath, I knew you were joking. Of course, Holmes replied, nodding. With that, he left the roof terrace, and immediately afterwards Salah's house. And there, long hours of idle and anxious waiting began.